Good afternoon, sir, and good afternoon, classmate. I am your next reporter, and I will present to you lesson number 3, that is the quantitative approach in language research. S- Quantitative approach is the collecting of numerical data that of quantify, and these data are analyzed using mathematical methods, statistics. So basically, it comes from the root word of quantity. It always deals with number, and these quantitative approach in our research or in language research, it's gonna explain the phenomena. This is a peculiar incident that can happen anywhere with any discipline or any organization. For example, decrease in sales, increase of dropout rate at school, shift in the percentage of COVID patients in the hospitals, and the rise in the rate of the teenage pregnancy. And the objective of my lesson is to discuss the history and characteristic of quantitative research. And I will also identify the difference of quantitative designs or the different quantitative designs in the language research, and also explain the strengths and weaknesses of quantitative research and common quantitative designs used in language research. So first, let us go to this historical overview of quantitative research. Um, I just want to put it into a simpler way of discussing. I in the time of a long time ago, already some thinker, great thinkers, philosopher, they already tried to answer or probably can't answer the questions. And when they do this, they use the scientific method. And this method is also used in the period of enlightenment and also the period of reasons or the age of reasons where people were already started to thinking and us and looking for the whys. And then that leads to the spectacular practice in natural sciences studies in 19th century, which also inspired early social researchers to adopt and started the quantitative research methods. So basically, this is the reason the scientific methods is the reason why we have not the quantitative. And also, this is also the basis of our, what do you call this, research. And scientific method ideas are observing a phenomenon or identifying a problems. Letter B, also generating an initial hypothesis. And then letter C, sorry, yeah, and testing the hypothesis by collecting and analyzing empirical data using standard procedures. The first half of the 20th century, something in the 1990s, so the major development both in the scientific method, the most notably through the work of Karl Popper, and in science and statistics, for example, the work of Spearman, Fisher, Neyman, and Pearson that leads to the increased and use of quantitative methodology across the whole range of the social disciplines. So as a result of this progress, the social sciences achieve maturity and earn the reputation of being able to study human being scientifically. It means we base on something, not just with our own prejudice, our own perceptions, both at the individual and the social level. And let's continue to the historical overview of quantitative research in applied linguistics. This is a timeline. According to Lazarton, in 1970 and 1985, there was a significant increase of quantitative article, which hand with the publication of several research methods in the 1980s. And then from 1991 to 2000, 1991 to 2000 reports a survey of 524 empirical studies that appeared in four major applied linguistics journal between these years. So the results show that as many as 86% of the research paper were quantitative, while 13% were qualitative and the 1% were mixed method. It means that they use the quantitative and the qualitative approaches. And it also concluded that quantitative studies reign supreme in the field of applied linguistics. Also highlights major change taking research orientation in applied linguistics. While in the 1980s, there was an increasing reliance on the quasi-experimental studies, that is past 15 years after they brought along the broader spectrum, multidisciplinary perspective and research and methodology with an increasing number of alternative, often qualitative designs that we employed. In addition, DAF also agreed to Lazarton studies in 2002 that in 1990 there was a also the highlight of growing sophistication of quantitative in both in the terms of their designs and their psychometric refinement that concluded that there has been a coming of age of quantitative research in applied linguistics. Now, for the next part, we'll be discussing the main characteristic of quantitative research. So the characteristics, according from the material, were using numbers, a priori categorization, variables, and cases. Statistics in the language of statistics, standardized procedure to assess objective reality, then the quest for generalizability and universal laws. So the most common knowledge is using number was the most important feature of the quantitative research. It was also presented by figures, tables, or graphs that showcase the summarize of the data collection and also stating generalization about the given problem or inquiry. So these using numbers, I think you can find this in the survey types of quantitative research, the one with the graphs that identify and also try to put the numbers into words just to describe. And then number two, a priori categorization, that is determining the specific categories and values needs to be done prior to the actual study. In here, I'm not really sure how to put these because it's really hard to find the word priori, but what I understood is before they conducted the research, I mean, the instruction material should be it should be clearly laid out and what is the research is looking out and looking for without putting any ideas like in between. So they have to categorize what they really are looking for in the group or these variables that they wanted to test. And number three, variables, then cases. So they focus on the variables than the case or the stories. And variables that they do are they study where the persons, place, things, and phenomenon that they're trying or you are trying as a researcher to measure in some ways. And number four, statistics and the language of statistics. This is quite vague for me too, but in further readings, I found out that it's concerned with the developing and studying method for collecting and analyzing, interpreting, and presenting empirical data, probably using the mathematical methods. That's statistic. Any measurement or data collection effort is subject to a number of sources of variation. And number five, standardized procedure to assess objective reality. So data gathering and analysis, sorry, I forgot the letter Y, analysis of results are then accurately, objectively, and are unaffected by the researcher's intuition and personal guesses, since that we're looking for, but more probably the fact without what we are will think of, just to make it that this kind of research can work to everybody. It's just not focusing in one group or one person, in short, to remain stable across investigators and subject. This is the reason why probably this is called the reign or the supreme kind of methods in research. Quest for generalizability. and universal laws. So numbers, variables, standardized procedures, statistics, and scientific reasoning are all part of the quantitative quest for facts that are generalizable beyond the particular and add up to wide-ranging idea or the universal law. And the data taken from a sample can be applied to the population if sampling is done according, example, sufficient size and random samples were taken. It means that your research maybe can apply to the wide range of ethnic groups or people or things that you wanted to find out. That probably that maybe this works for them or it's true to them. Probably it's also true to the other people. But of course, it's also based to, I mean, it's also limited. Quantitative designs in language research. So there are two. We have first the survey design or the descriptive design, and letter B, the experimental research. So a survey design provides quantitative description of trends, attitude, opinions of population. It also tells the association among the variables of population by studying a sample of the population, generally a big number of population. And the survey designs are further divided into several types that where we go to here the research method that describe the characteristic of the population in front of a study, primarily focus on describing the nature of demographic segment and focuses more on the what of the research subject. Like what is the blunt attitude towards, example, what is the level of satisfaction of the customers? What is the behavior of the students in an online class? How do the consumers think? What is the perception of the buyers in the certain brand? But it's also limited to, descriptive research cannot describe what caused a situation. It cannot be used for causal or causal relationship where one variable affect another without covering why it happens. First is a descriptive survey. It is used to analyze, interpret, and report data from a survey. So this assigns answer a descriptive question. An example of a research title that I think fits best for these is Senior High School Student Research Competencies and Attitudes Basis for Research Training and Program. This is where they can ask what attitudes or competencies that can change or probably improve the training program. And next is the descriptive correlational. So in descriptive correlational, it is used to determine whether or not there is a relationship that exists between two or more quantifiable variables. So these correlation may be positive or negative. And I've actually found here also another example of a research title, which is Crushes in Dating Among Senior High School Students. So we're gonna look for the relationship. Either this occurrence can benefit one another or there are more of the negative effect. So it means that is the context of the relationship, also according to the statistical data, depending on the number of hours of how they may be dates, if it's effects, if it's too much, or there are limitations. And then the descriptive evaluative, it is used to determine the goodness of an existing program. It is directed to whether or not the particular program has achieved its goal or not. It means that it is often used in longitudinal study where researcher repeats the designs over time. And this is also where we judge the action and activities in terms of the value criteria and the standard. Maybe like writing a paper about performance of the teacher. An example of a research that I think fits for this is level of effectiveness of using self-learning modules in teaching science among junior high school students. And lastly, the descriptive comparative. So this is used to examine the similarities and differences between or among variables. And the example, what do you call this is, or the titles that I found are parenting needs of adolescent mothers. Since this, since descriptive comparative, they look for the cause or maybe the consequences or the differences among maybe parenting mothers. Since case by case, this adolescent's mother could be getting support from their parents and others were neglected, and also learning styles and level of motivational of honor students, since each honor students they also face different struggles and how they actually how they actually manage to be an honor student despite of the challenges they faces. So there is the consequences or the cause or the differences between these variables. Now, our next research design is the experimental research, which deals with the cause and effect relationship. This is also utilizes the method of different research principle and uses two sets of a variable. And then the first set acts as a constant when used to measure the difference of the second set. Experimental research, they also use the scientific method to establish, the cause and effect among variables. So there will be maybe a dependent or independent variable, control, and experimental group. Example, as a PE teacher, as a PE teacher, you want to use strategies that works best for the online class. So how are we gonna do? So we're gonna do it through experimental research. Now, an experimental research, sorry, excuse me. There are different types, and there are the true experimental design types, there are two. There are true experimental design, quasi-experimental research design, and there are also subtypes, which are the pre-test, post-test design, time series design, Latin square design, repeated measures design, and factorial designs. True experimental designs is in this criteria are present, the researcher has control over the variable, the treatment, intervention, and the subject. So there is an experimental and a control group. Subjects are assigned to groups, and it's also involved manipulation of one more independent variable, that is what we call the variable of influence, and the dependent variables is the variable that we influence, or where we're gonna do our test, probably like the pre-test or post-test. And they are actually carefully measured and typically in the form of, as I said, the pre-test and the post-testing. And true experiments also include uh, maybe a means where receive experimental treatment in addition to complete just the pre and post-test. And finally, true experiments are characterized by random assignment. That means it should not be, you know, it should not be given to a specific, but it's going to be done randomly by the means of toss coins and probably, sorry, excuse me. Finally, true experiments are characterized by random assignments. That is, participants are randomly placed into the control and the experimental condition. So following the chance procedure according to Gavitier, Forzano, Hatch, Lizardo, and Kirk, and other researchers. And this random assignment might involve tactics such as, flipping coin, drawing names out of a hat, just just to avoid the specific, that the specific choice, because we should be subjective, or I mean, sorry, objective towards our research. And true experimental design types that used are the pre-test and the post-test design, the post-test only controlled group, and the Solomon 4 group. This is not found in the material. I found this through my further reading, and I'm quite confused if the Solomon Fur group is the same with the Latin square or group. And the quasi-experimental design. In this design, it is either no control group or the subject are not randomly assigned to groups. Though studies do not require a true control group but may include a comparison group. However, a comparison is an additional experimental group that receives a different experimental treatment, and non-experiment may also take the form of pre-experimental design. So what are the pre-experimental design? Pre-experimental designs use neither a control nor a comparison group according to Noonan, and types of these designs include one-shot case study research design, one group pretest post-test design, and static group comparisons design. So this means design only use one group or the single group to test the effectiveness of the independent variable, like corrective feedback. So Frankel and others in 2003 labeled this is a poor experiment because the researcher who used design has difficulty assessing the effectiveness of the independent variables. In quasi-experimental types or research, they can use the non-equivalent control groups types and the time series design types. The types of design and language research. So we have, this is the type, it means the sub-kind that we can use during our experiments. Pretest, post-test design, time series design, Latin square design. This is the one that I'm confused to Solomon. The Solomon for design, repeated measure design or repeat participant design, and factorial design. The pretest post design control group is probably the most common experimental research design. So the experimental group takes part in some type of treatment or intervention, which can consist of single or multiple training session. For example, in the class, there will be like students, okay, just for example, Peters and Webb utilize an experiment designed to examine the effect of TV viewing on the incidental learning of the language to acquisition vocabulary. And our independent variable is viewing versus not viewing the second language television. And the dependent variable is from recognition and meaning recall of language or the second language vocabulary. And the design errors the participant the participants Dutch learners of second language English were randomly assigned to either a true control group or an experimental group. So the experiment consisted of 3 sessions, a pre-testing session, 1 week prior to treatment, the treatment session, and post-design, and so on. This can be found from our material. And one more example, I think, for example, in a class, there will be like, pair and share of students that we can tutor the weak students. So we can tutor our weak classmate. So our weak classmate will be our experimental group, and you as the one, or as the one stands as a tutor, will be the control group. So your tutor will be given, of course, maybe the pre-test, but or no, given the pre-test and the post-test, while you can only given the post-test. And the time series design. So a time series design is example of periodical or longitudinal design in which the researcher collects samples of language on a regular basis over a set period of time. So by collecting on multiple occasions, so this design can allow insight into the time course of the language development. So then the other design, this is gonna take us more, but I'm not sure how long. It depends on your studies. So including these changes may be immediate or gradual, delayed, or incubated or residual, as well as the permanency of any effect resulting from a treatment. And the time series design is characterized by multiple observation both before and after the treatment. So the number of pre-treatment and post-treatment observation can vary, and there is no need to have the same number of observation pre-post-treatment. And the treatment may entail a single or multiple treatment sessions, whether involving a single or multiple trainings. And the treatment can vary in length from including brief of extended session. And the Latin square design, the Latin square design is frequently used within the experiment that utilize multiple data collections instrument. This design can be traced, in 1925 by Fisher. It gets its name from an ancient puzzle that has concern with the number of ways that Latin letter can be arranged in a square. So if I'm not sure if you're aware or if you're familiar with Sudoku, although Sudoku has 9, but this one got 4. I mean, they don't need in horizontal or either different vertical way, just like this one. And if you look at the example, so there is always not they're not systematic. They are not actually, yeah, they could be chronological, but they should not be in order, or they should be different. Uh, Whereas, for example, if in a class, if you're given this kind of task, so these two groups can have the task, the other two groups will not be receiving the task, while the other two groups will take these 4 groups of people. So randomly, you're gonna have like 4 sets of groups wherein you're gonna test, or you're gonna put you're gonna test, or you're gonna treat your variables. And repeated measures design, or within participant design, also known as within participant designs, they're characterized by a single group of participants who take part in all the different treatment conditions and are measured at multiple times. So you have to be, I think, very careful when you look for one single of variables. So, within participant design, the participant is subjected to all levels of the independent variables. This design derives its name from the fact that the design involves repeated measurement of the same participant. Within the participant designs differ from between participant designs where the treatment conditions are assigned to different groups of participants. That is, different participants are tested at the various level of the independent variable. So this is the example. Next is the factorial design. Include more than one independent variable. So that is employed to investigate the effect of 2 or more independent variable on the dependent variables. The independent variables in the factorial design are also referred to as factors. Factorial designs allow researchers to examine not only the impact of each independent variable separately, but also the combined effect of the independent variables on the dependent variables. So the separate effect of the independent variables are described as a main effect, and their combined effect are referred to as interaction effect. So in this design, a notation system is used to denote the number of levels associated with each independent variables. So just like this one. So Zaldivia provide a recent example of study utilizing a factorial design. They employed mixed 2 times 2 by the factorial design to examine the impact of task complexity and modality on the second language performance. The 2 independent variables were task complexity within the participant factor and modality between participant variables. So written modality and the spoken modality. So that is the writing and their speech. And also there were also what do you call this?